Hello, my name is Caleb Villa, and this is my presentation, Defined by a Test Score, the Epidemic of Standardized Testing. I want you to imagine a third grader named George. George loves school. While not particularly gifted, he earns passing grades and enjoys the school community. At the end of the year, he fails one state reading test, and he is held back while the rest of his friends continue to fourth grade. Over the next several years, George's love for learning vanishes. He is angry and frustrated. Despite intensive reading classes that he is forced to take instead of PE and art classes, he still struggles to pass the state reading tests. Fast forward a decade to his 12th grade year. George is now a restaurant cook, and he loves his job. His boss wants to promote him to a manager position as soon as George earns his high school diploma. But George cannot graduate without passing the state reading test. George takes the test, and he fails by 3 points. He has passed every single one of his high school courses, and he will not gain his diploma just because of this test that has haunted him since third grade. This story, found in the Washington Post, shows the weight that one test can have on a person's education, work, and development. So let me ask you, is something wrong with George, or is something wrong with the system? This system of standardized testing became government mandated by the No Child Left Behind Act passed in 2002. Enacted during George W. Bush's presidency, the act required public schools to implement standardized testing to measure student achievement in order to improve the quality of the public education system over time. This attempt at education reform proved to be disastrously unsuccessful. It failed on nearly every level, and none of its goals were realized. It failed to improve student performance, according to data which I'll discuss later. It failed to encourage quality teaching, instead causing teachers to narrow their curricula to be more focused on memorization and test drills. It failed to provide equal opportunity to disadvantaged students, as standardized tests actually are especially difficult for those from low-income families and those who are not native English speakers. Standardized testing needs to take a backseat in the American education system. The weight our schools put on standardized testing is detrimental to genuine learning and student success. Since the dawn of the 21st century, high-stakes standardized testing has served as the basis of our American education system. And wouldn't you know, the American education system has failed to progress since the dawn of the 21st century. Based on data from PISA, showing that the United States is falling behind in terms of overall student achievement. This is a direct correlation that cannot be ignored. Standardized testing has helped bring student achievement to a grinding halt. PISA, which stands for Program for International Student Assessment, is an organization which regularly measures and ranks industrialized countries based on their overall student performance. Year to year, PISA results have shown frustrating stagnation. Students in the United States have failed to improve their reading, science, and mathematics scores in over 20 years. Meanwhile, several other nations have been quickly and quietly surpassing the United States, consistently moving up the ranks, especially when it comes to math. You can see that by this graph here. The black line is the United States for the last 2 decades, and the blue line is the average. And as you can see, even though we haven't improved in reading in 20 years, we are still at average levels. Whereas in math, we have not improved, but we are below average. And in science, we've only improved slightly. So, why has the education system in America failed to progress in 20 years? Well, many researchers have linked the United States' lack of educational advancement to the American education system's fixation with standardized testing as an exclusive, accurate measure of student achievement. The value and accuracy of standardized testing has been hotly debated for decades, even before the ineffective No Child Left Behind Act. On one side of the argument, shown on the left, defenders of standardized testing point out that grading is done by machine, which eliminates human error. This also makes scoring the tests quick and convenient. When done by hand, grading is a time-consuming, laborious process. Supporters also point out that standardized testing only focuses on the absolute essentials, usually math and reading, while cutting the topics that are not foundational to schools. What is considered inessential are first and foremost Electives, such as music, business, foreign languages, computer science, art, you get the idea. Many humanities are also labeled dispensable. Perhaps the most widely cited argument in favor of standardized testing stems from the fact that it contributes to the educational success of China, the world's current leader in education. Data from PISA shows that many East Asian countries, like China, consistently outperform the US, and the education systems of these nations rely heavily on standardized testing. Remember this argument. I'll come back to it later. Let's move on to the other side of the debate. Many have argued that standardized testing does not give an accurate assessment of student ability. Here are 3 of the most common points I found in my research. First, standardized testing prioritizes short-term memory over genuine knowledge. If you've ever crammed for a test the night before, then you know exactly what these researchers mean. You sit down for the test the next morning, exhausted from a long night of jamming factoids into your head. It's almost like you're being tested on your ability to remember information that you read 7 hours ago, not so much on your understanding of the topic as a whole. Standardized testing also relies on a multiple choice format, which discourages critical thinking and real-world problem solving. When in your life have you encountered an issue that only has one solution and can be fixed by selecting one of 4 answers? Likely never. In his book titled Standardized Minds, Peter Sachs argues that standardized testing promotes an overly simplistic way of thinking in which everything is either incorrect or correct, right or wrong, with nothing in between. Just because a student scores highly on the SAT example does not mean that the student is better at real-world problem solving, because the types and format of the questions in standardized testing is so far removed from reality. Most importantly, standardized testing only measures a small portion of student ability and flatly ignores countless factors of meaningful education. Mary Jane Harkins and Sonia Singer write in a journal article that high-stakes testing is a reductive assessment of student capability, and that student capability is something that exam scores can never fully accurately measure. They write, quote, skills, abilities, knowledge, and intelligence of individual students cannot be adequately reflected and or quantified by a one-shot single test score. This was the argument that most affected my view of the issue. Here are just 4 qualities which, in my opinion, must be taught and nurtured in schools, and yet they are overlooked entirely by the standardized testing system. It does not even attempt to measure these 4 abilities. Critical thinking is one of them. The capacity to analyze material and form your own opinion about it is essential, not just to education, but to participating in society. The multiple choice format inherently inhibits this, as I mentioned earlier. Ingenuity is something that is also severely stunted by standardized testing, as it actively discourages inventiveness and originality by forcing students to pursue monotonous memorization and average scores. Interpersonal skills, which is a must, whether you're in a college classroom or in a job interview. Social intelligence is vital for students, even though standardized tests would lead you to believe otherwise. And finally, creativity. Countless students are gifted artists with the potential to thrive in a decent learning environment, but these students are invalidated, punished, and restrained by standardized testing. Standardized testing is inaccurate and misleading, yet it dictates school funding, teaching methods, and the futures of individual students. If standardized test scores are a glaring misrepresentation of student ability, why do so many people still defend the system? Well, they point to China. And for good reason, honestly. China is leading the world in terms of education, and their education system would fall apart without standardized testing. As online journalist Haifeng Chen wrote in the Harvard Political Review, quote, it seems odd for the United States, whose PISA ranking is 36 in math, 28th in science, and 24th in reading, to venture to a test-optional system, while the world's leaders in education are busy sharpening their number 2 pencils, end quote. Wow, that's a zinger. But this line of reasoning ignores the stark differences between Chinese culture and American culture. The former is built on standardization, but the latter is built on diversity. For example, Chinese students uniformly receive the exact same education from teachers who are trained to administer a highly specific curriculum. In the United States, teachers are underpaid and underappreciated, which can damage the quality of their teaching. Even more significant is the fact that socioeconomic differences in China are relatively slim in comparison with the enormous, widening wage gaps in the United States. These major disparities between China and the United States can be traced back to their fundamental economic systems, Chinese communism and American capitalism. China's communism means that standardization not only defines their academic tests, but it defines much of their culture and specifically their entire education system, from the way the teachers are trained and paid to the organizations that create and administer the tests. Capitalism inherently values originality over uniformity. In order for the United States to ever match China's success with standardized testing, the United States would have to abandon capitalism, which is obviously not a rational option. This is just one major issue with the idea that the United States can copy China's education methods. Since the United States is already defined by diversity and not standardization, there is no good reason why this ideology should be ignored in the public education system. With plenty of technology at its disposal, the government needs to reform its education system so that it caters to individual student needs rather than attempting and failing to mirror Chinese methods of standardization. How can we make our education system mirror American society's push for individuality? To find the answer, go get out your student iPad, or your student Chromebook, or your student PC. This technology could be used to individually track the progress of each student. In 2012, the government spent $65 million shoving technology into our schools without any clear plan on how to use it. That figure has only risen since then, yet technology in schools is still completely wasted. One 2019 study conducted by Glimpse K-12 found that 67% of the software purchased goes unused. Also, personal educational devices are not customized. Even though most students have their own school device assigned to them, these devices, are hardly used to benefit that student in a unique way. There is nothing in the software that makes it specifically designed to help the individual student who owns it. Just look at this image. Every single PC in this image has the exact same graph, and all the students are using it in the exact same way. Why couldn't this image just be put on the whiteboard, for example? Most people would look at this picture and see a high-tech classroom. When I look at that picture, all I see is a complete waste of potential and a complete waste of taxpayer dollars. Finally, those in authority fail to understand the potential of the technology already purchased. During my research, I was trying to find innovative ways in which technology is used currently in schools. The first article I found was showing that GIFs could be used on slideshows. $56 billion for GIFs to be used in PowerPoint slideshows? I think that money can go towards something a little less trivial. If technology is used to its full potential and with the proper software, standardized test scores could be replaced with detailed data that shows a student's specific strengths and weaknesses. This data would not only benefit those who seek to track overall student achievement, but it could be used to uniquely serve each and every student. If English isn't your first language, then the software could immediately translate science terms you're struggling to understand. If your family can't afford private face-to-face tutoring, the software could give you precise, personalized goals based on your performance in each class. If you're absolute garbage at chemistry like I am, the software could show you exactly what concepts you're not grasping and how to better overcome those weaknesses. There are many possible alternatives to standardized testing, but in my opinion, this one would be the easiest to achieve. The technology existed 10 years ago, devices clog our schools, and taxpayer money is already being funneled into educational technology. But as it is right now, our education system is in desperate need of repair. Standardized testing is inaccurate, technology is wasted, and taxpayer dollars are fueling an education system that is inherently broken. If there's one thing I want you to remember from this presentation before I go, just remember that test scores are a misleading measure of your ability. The idea that they can quantify your merit is an absurd lie. Do not let standardized tests define you. Thank you. Here are my works cited, and here are my images cited.